In a world that often measures worth by lineage, status, and material inheritance, there are those who navigate life without the familiar markers that connect individuals to their ancestry or community. For many, the idea of a family or a name is intertwined with tradition, social standing, and a sense of rootedness that gives life meaning. Yet, somewhere within this complex fabric of identity, a profound question persists. What happens when the very foundation of family is absent? When a person is born into nothingness, no surname to carry, no lineage to trace, how do they find their place in a society obsessed with history and heritage? This is where the story begins, not with privilege or legacy, but with the stark reality of having nothing at all. Imagine a child devoid of a surname, floating in the margins of social recognition, overlooked not because of any flaw, but simply because he was born outside the bounds of conventional family ties. He grows up knowing he has no ancestral roots to cling to, no tradition to inherit, no name to pass on to the future. The world sees him as an outsider, a blank slate, and in many ways, he embodies the very essence of nothingness itself. Yet amidst this absence, an indomitable spirit begins to stir, a desire to forge meaning, to carve a space for himself in a society that often dismisses those without lineage. It is here that the narrative takes a turn, revealing a remarkable vision, the creation of something new from the void. His journey is not about lamenting what is missing, but about transforming it into a different kind of inheritance, one that transcends bloodlines and titles. Instead of seeking recognition through traditional means, he endeavors to give others what he lacked, something tangible, enduring, and deeply personal. This vision materializes as a fund, a vessel meant to bestow surnames, family bonds, and a sense of belonging upon those who, like him, have been discarded by the conventional systems of lineage. Through this act, he challenges the very notions of inheritance, suggesting that family is not solely a matter of blood, but of responsibility, kindness, and connection. It is a radical idea that even in the absence of a surname, one can create a new legacy, one rooted in community and care. What makes this story compelling is not merely the act of building a family for others, but the deeper commentary on identity and purpose. It questions whether true inheritance is something that must be inherited at all, or if it can be forged anew through conscious effort and compassion. As this man dedicates himself to a cause that many might dismiss as idealistic or impossible, he embodies a profound rejection of the idea that origins define destiny. Instead, he demonstrates that by choosing to give, he rewrites his own story, transforming his lack into a gift for others who are similarly adrift. The journey ahead promises to explore themes of belonging, resilience, and the power of intentionality in shaping a future that defies the constraints of the past. This story is not just about one man's quiet rebellion against societal norms, but about the universal human desire to find meaning in existence, regardless of the circumstances of birth. It invites reflection on what truly constitutes identity and what it means to belong. The narrative hints at possibilities beyond the traditional constructs, suggesting that family can be created anew, by choice, by action, and by the profound act of giving. As the path unfolds, it becomes clear that this is not simply a tale of individual salvation, but a testament to the potential that exists when one dares to imagine a different legacy. From the emptiness of nothingness, a new story begins, one built on the foundation of compassion, purpose, and the enduring human need for connection. Building on this, however, a deeper layer emerges when considering not just the act of creating a new family, but the philosophical implications of redefining what it means to be rooted. Traditional notions of kinship often bind individuals to specific expectations rooted in ancestry, handed-down rituals, and inherited responsibilities. Yet, in forging a new familial model, the focus shifts toward a dynamic process where bonds are cultivated through shared purpose rather than predetermined bloodlines. This perspective challenges how society perceives identity, emphasizing that kinship can be a fluid construct, intertwined with conscious intention rather than genetic destiny. Now, think about how this reframing influences societal structures. Instead of rigid hierarchies based on pedigree, community becomes a tapestry woven through deliberate acts of inclusion and support. When this shift occurs, the concept of family transforms from an inherited legacy into an active choice that reflects our current values and aspirations. Furthermore, this approach highlights the power of collective effort in reconstructing identity. Imagine a group of individuals who, despite lacking formal ties, come together to create a collective narrative that affirms their interdependence. This is akin to a mosaic assembled without a guiding master plan, but with each piece deliberately placed to form a meaningful whole. The act of building such a mosaic requires patience, vision, and a willingness to see beauty in imperfection. In a similar vein, designing a family fund serves as a collective sculpture. Each contribution, each act of kindness, adding layers of complexity and resilience. This process demonstrates that a cohesive identity can be cultivated through shared experiences and mutual acknowledgement, rather than through unchangeable origins. It underscores that the essence of belonging is rooted in the ongoing process of nurturing relationships rather than in static labels. Another crucial layer is the role of intentionality in overcoming societal narratives that equate worth with lineage. Society often propagates the idea that one's value is predominantly tied to the status of their ancestors, sometimes dismissing those born outside the traditional framework as incomplete or less significant. Yet, this perspective neglects the transformative potential of agency. Take, for instance, individuals who rise above circumstances of social invisibility by consciously choosing to redefine their legacy. Their actions serve as a living testament that influence and significance are not limited by birthright, but are shaped through deliberate choices and impactful deeds. When the protagonist establishes a fund for orphans, he does so as an act of rebellion against these limiting narratives. It becomes a testament that the power to create meaning resides within every person, regardless of their origins. This realization can inspire others to see beyond inherited privileges and recognize their capacity to forge new identities through intention and effort. Expanding further, the act of giving a family and a surname to others becomes a symbolic act of reclamation, not just for those who receive, but also for the one who offers. It embodies a transfer of agency, where the giver asserts control over the narrative, transforming a personal void into a source of hope for others. The process can be likened to planting seeds in barren soil. Even the hardest ground, when nurtured, can yield life. Each surname handed over signifies a new beginning, a reclamation of identity that was previously denied. It also emphasizes that community is not merely about shared genetics, but about shared commitment. This act of extending kinship acts like a ripple in a pond, spreading outward and creating concentric circles of connection and support. It redefines the sense of inheritance, from material possessions to intangible bonds rooted in compassion. Now consider how this becomes a form of resistance against the fragmenting forces of modern society, which often isolates individuals or reduces them to their labels. In creating a collective identity rooted in purposeful action rather than ancestral lineage, the protagonist demonstrates that resilience stems from the ability to organize around shared values. The fund becomes a vessel not only for names, but for a shared vision of community that transcends transient identities. This approach fosters resilience because it anchors individuals in a collective effort that values their contributions regardless of their origins, affirming that identity is an evolving construct that thrives on adaptability and agency. When people see such models in practice, they are encouraged to reimagine their own roles within society, emphasizing their capacity to influence change and redefine what it means to belong. It becomes clear that ultimately, the act of giving a family face and name is more than charity. It's a profound assertion of human capability to craft meaningful lives even when starting from nothing. Building upon this, consider how the act of bestowing a surname or creating a family bond can extend beyond personal salvation to serve as a catalyst for societal transformation. When someone constructs a legacy rooted in intentionality and compassion, they generate ripples that challenge entrenched stereotypes about worth and identity. It's not merely about individual upliftment, but about disrupting narratives that marginalize those deemed unworthy due to circumstances beyond their control. In this context, establishing a collective identity through such acts functions as a form of cultural resistance, an assertion that worth is not predicated on ancestral prestige, but on the capacity to foster community and foster change. This perspective invites reflection on how small acts of inclusion and acknowledgement can gradually undermine systemic hierarchies that perpetuate inequality, fostering a broader ethos of acceptance and shared purpose. From a practical standpoint, this philosophy invites us to reconsider the role of institutions and policies that traditionally reinforce lineage-based privileges. Imagine designing community programs that emphasize mentorship, shared experiences, and mutual support, emphasizing connections forged through effort rather than bloodlines. Such initiatives could reframe social recognition, transforming societal structures into open-ended networks where individuals are valued primarily for their contributions and willingness to uplift others. These models could serve as external manifestations of the internal transformation initiated by individuals like the protagonist, a deliberate cultivation of belonging beyond inherited titles. Consequently, the act of creating a family fund becomes a blueprint for societal change, illustrating how deliberate, compassionate acts can contribute to a collective identity rooted in shared responsibility rather than inherited distinction. Furthermore, this process resonates deeply with the concept of generational impact. When one chooses to redefine what constitutes family, they influence future perceptions of kinship, fostering a legacy that is not confined to familial ties, but extended through communal bonds. Now, reflect on how this might alter perceptions within families themselves. For children growing up in communities where such acts are commonplace, the idea of kinship shifts from a fixed inheritance to an adaptable network of mutual care. This can inspire a mindset that values emotional investment over genetic connection, fostering resilience and adaptability in the face of societal upheavals or personal crises. Over time, these cultural shifts can create a new understanding where the essence of family is rooted in the willingness to nurture, protect, and sustain others, regardless of bloodline. Another dimension to explore involves the spiritual or philosophical significance of this act of redefining kinship. When someone intentionally grants identity and belonging to those who lack it, they participate in an act of meaning-making that transcends material concerns. It becomes a sacred gesture, a form of stewardship over the concept of community itself. Think of it as planting a seed of hope in a barren land, knowing that the act of nurturing can bring forth unexpected life. Such acts serve as a testament to human capacity for transcendence. They affirm that even in societies that often prioritize superficial distinctions or disposable identities, there exists a deeper well of compassion capable of transforming despair into hope. These acts are not merely practical but imbued with a quiet spiritual affirmation that all individuals deserve recognition, regardless of their origin. In addition, consider the implications when this ideology is applied at a broader scale, perhaps impacting policy or communal ethos. Imagine cities or nations adopting a paradigm shift where civic engagement focuses on fostering inclusive identities through shared narratives and collective histories. Public spaces could become canvases for stories of resilience and generosity, testaments to the idea that family is a fluid, evolving construct shaped by deliberate acts of kindness. Such a cultural elevation of kinship would signal a shift away from transactional relationships to ones grounded in shared purpose and moral responsibility. It invites society to view unity not as a product of genetic destiny but as a conscious choice, an ongoing effort to weave together diverse threads into a resilient fabric that sustains everyone, especially those who have been historically marginalized. Now envision how this viewpoint influences individual behavior and personal development. When the concept of legacy centers on kindness and inclusivity rather than inheritance, it empowers each person to see themselves as architects of community. It places responsibility firmly in their hands, to extend support where structural systems fall short, to redefine family as an active pursuit rather than a passive inheritance. This perspective fosters a sense of agency, an understanding that constructing a meaningful identity hinges on actions that affirm others' dignity. It becomes clear that the act of creating a family or bestowing a name is not an isolated incident, but a continuous practice, an ongoing commitment to cultivating connections that elevate everyone, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. When we shift focus from the act of creating bonds to the internal transformation it fosters, we discover a profound redefinition of self-identity that often remains unseen. Embodying the spirit of building kinship solely through deliberate effort compels individuals to confront their own prejudices, biases, and ingrained perceptions of worth. This conscious endeavor acts as a catalyst for personal evolution, forcing one to question deeply ingrained notions about hierarchy, control, and entitlement. When someone takes it upon themselves to bestow a sense of family on others, they simultaneously challenge the idea that worth must be inherited or bestowed by birthright. Instead, they recognize that human connection is an active process, one requiring intentionality and vulnerability, elements that strip away superficial distinctions and reveal the core of our shared humanity. Now, consider how this reshaping impacts emotional resilience. When someone invests genuine effort into fostering community, they develop a kind of resilience rooted not in external validation, but in internal conviction. Each act of kindness, each relationship forged through conscious effort, becomes a brick in a fortress that can withstand societal upheavals or personal losses. This form of resilience is unlike the fragile confidence built solely upon social status. It is resilient because it is self-sustaining, anchored in authentic human connection. Over time, individuals who dedicate themselves to such acts cultivate an unshakable sense of purpose. This purpose transcends transient circumstances or fleeting societal recognition. It's grounded in the knowledge that their contribution, no matter how small, sustains and renews the fabric of community. Furthermore, the act of granting identity to others can serve as a profound form of liberation for both the giver and the recipient. For those who have long been marginalized, lacking official recognition or societal acceptance, receiving a surname or acknowledgement becomes a form of emancipation from invisibility. It allows them to step into a collective narrative, to see themselves as integral parts of a shared history that they help shape. Conversely, the giver finds liberation from the constraints of possessiveness and control. Instead of holding on to a limited sense of legacy, they embrace abundance, understanding that the act of giving a name, a family, or a place in the community expands their universe rather than diminishes it. This exchange becomes a mutual act of empowerment, fueling a cycle where both parties experience growth beyond external circumstances. Transitioning from personal enlightenment to societal influence, one can observe how these acts ripple outward, guiding communities to reevaluate existing institutions and customs. Now think about public policies that prioritize inclusivity, where registration systems, for example, are designed to acknowledge individuals based on their contributions or commitments rather than solely on ancestry. Such reforms echo the idea that belonging is a malleable state, cultivated through collective dedication rather than predetermined lines. When civic structures align with this principle, they foster environments where diversity flourishes because the emphasis shifts from inherited identity to dynamic participation. Ultimately, communities that embrace this broader understanding tend to develop a robust fabric of social cohesion, anchored in shared effort rather than inherited privilege. In addition, the philosophical implications extend into the realm of moral responsibility. When we recognize that kinship can be crafted through deliberate action, it becomes a moral obligation, an ethical imperative to pursue inclusion actively rather than passively accepting traditional boundaries. Now, envision how this perspective influences personal choices. When faced with opportunities to support someone who has been cast aside by society, the decision to embrace them as family transforms from an act of charity into a responsibility rooted in conscience. It shifts the narrative from mere benevolence to a recognition that fostering human dignity is an essential aspect of moral integrity. This mindset compels individuals to move beyond superficial gestures and instead commit to long-term engagement, creating sustainable bonds that resist the erosion of societal neglect. Finally, this approach invites a profound reconsideration of our understanding of inheritance as a force for both continuity and change. When inheritance is redefined to include the legacy of compassion, empathy, and active community building, it becomes a powerful tool for shaping society's future. Instead of perpetuating cycles of exclusivity, it encourages a culture in which every person's effort contributes to a collective inheritance, one that values evolution over stagnation. Now think of this as planting a living seed in fertile soil. It takes root and grows through ongoing nurturing, eventually transforming landscapes that once seemed barren. The true legacy lies not in what one received at birth, but in what one consciously sows into the fabric of society through acts of recognition and care. Through this lens, creating a family becomes an act of societal reinvention, generating a resilient, inclusive narrative that continuously expands and deepens as new acts of compassion blossom across generations. When contemplating how the act of building a new kinship alters the fabric of personal responsibility, it becomes evident that this shift extends beyond individual relationships into the realm of societal morality. Creating families through conscious effort demands a reevaluation of accountability, transforming it from a passive expectation into an active commitment. For example, considering the role of community leaders, educators, and policymakers, each bears a moral obligation to foster environments where care is a collective priority, not a privilege granted by lineage. Recognizing kinship as a product of intention prompts us to question traditional notions of obligation, urging us to see responsibilities as ongoing projects rooted in deliberate acts rather than inherited duties handed down through generations. Now examine how this perspective impacts conflict resolution within fractured communities. When relationships are constructed through choice rather than biological ties, the potential for reconciliation rises dramatically. Disputes rooted in historical grievances often hinge on perceived loyalties tied to family hierarchies. If, instead, the focus shifts toward mutual understanding cultivated through shared effort, these divisions become more permeable. The act of establishing a new sense of unity, perhaps through collaborative projects or joint ventures, serves as an anchor for healing wounds that otherwise seem immovable. Such bonds, forged in the crucible of shared purpose, often carry greater durability because they are built on tangible contributions to a collective goal rather than on the fragile foundation of inherited allegiance. Furthermore, fostering kinship through intentional acts becomes a tool for addressing societal disparities. When a community recognizes that building meaningful relationships can be a form of social investment, it opens pathways for redressing long-standing inequalities. Imagine a neighborhood where local institutions initiate programs that pair residents across socio-economic divides, encouraging mentorship, cooperation, and joint innovation. These relationships, consciously cultivated, serve as bridges over structural gaps that perpetuate poverty or marginalization. In this context, kinship no longer merely signifies familial bonds, but evolves into a strategic mechanism for social cohesion, resilience, and empowerment. By actively choosing to engage one another in sustained, purposeful interactions, individuals collectively forge a fabric strong enough to withstand external pressures and internal fractures. Transitioning to a broader cultural level, consider how this approach influences societal narratives about identity and worth. When communities emphasize the importance of intentional kinship, they contribute to a cultural shift away from hierarchical notions that elevate some groups above others. Instead, emphasis is placed on the capacity for transformation, on how anyone, regardless of background or origin, can become a vital part of a vibrant collective. This shift challenges ingrained stereotypes and fosters a mindset where worth is a dynamic attribute, earned through ongoing acts of inclusion and service. As these stories proliferate, they redefine what it means to belong, allowing individuals who once felt marginalized or invisible to see themselves as active architects of their social reality. The narrative becomes less about where one is born and more about where one chooses to invest effort to grow and contribute. Another dimension emerges when considering how this philosophy influences personal identity formation. When kinship is understood as a constellation of deliberate acts, individuals gain agency over how they see themselves in relation to others. They are no longer passive recipients of familial labels, but are empowered to craft identities based on their commitments and actions. For instance, someone may choose to become a protector, mentor, or advocate within a community, roles that transcend traditional family roles but carry equal weight in building a sense of belonging. This perspective invigorates individual purpose, transforming life into an ongoing project of contribution rather than a fixed inheritance dictated by circumstance. By consciously shaping their relationships, people forge a sense of self that is fluid, adaptable, and rooted in the tangible realities of their choices. Finally, the recognition that kinship can be actively constructed rather than passively inherited opens space for redefining notions of legacy itself. Instead of viewing one's impact solely through tangible assets or familial titles, the focus shifts toward the intangible, such as acts of kindness, mentorship, or community service, that ripple outward and endure beyond personal lifespan. Now, consider how this redefinition influences how we honor those who came before us. Their true inheritance becomes the example they set and the connections they fostered, which continue to inspire subsequent generations. This paradigm encourages individuals to see themselves as custodians of a living tradition of deliberate care, a legacy that evolves daily through intentional acts that affirm human dignity and foster resilience. Ultimately, by shifting responsibility from mere inheritance to ongoing cultivation, We embrace a future where kinship and community are vibrant, active, and continually redefined through our choices. Drawing these strands together, we see a tapestry woven from deliberate acts that challenge traditional notions of inheritance, identity, and belonging. The threads of purpose, choice, and shared responsibility intertwine to create a fabric more resilient and adaptable than the static constructs of lineage or societal expectation. Each idea, like a vital strand, contributes to a collective understanding that community and kinship are not fixed entities handed down through the blood, but living, breathing networks shaped by ongoing intention. This recognition transforms the landscape of human connection into a dynamic terrain, one that invites active participation rather than passive acceptance. It beckons us to envision relationships not as predetermined or inherited, but as possibilities that unfold in the space between individuals willing to forge meaning through conscious engagement. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer, pointing us beyond the boundaries of conventional inheritance toward a horizon where meaning is crafted through deliberate, compassionate acts. The analogy of planting seeds takes on new significance. Instead of awaiting the legacy of roots already established, we are called to sow new ones intentionally, knowing that the richness of the future depends on our willingness to nurture what begins from nothing. This process transforms the act of giving or creating kinship into a form of stewardship, where every gesture contributes to a broader, more inclusive mosaic, one that continues to evolve with each new connection made. It emphasizes that the true substance of inheritance is found not only in what is passed down, but in what is actively cultivated and expanded through human effort. As we pivot towards the final reflection, it becomes evident that this journey through concepts of identity and community ultimately converges on an invitation to reconsider how we define our legacy in the broader human story. Just as a sculptor molds raw material into a meaningful form, so too are we called to shape the narrative of our shared existence, selectively and consciously designing the relationships and values that will ripple beyond us. The collective potential inherent in this perspective suggests that the power to redefine kinship lies not solely in individual acts, but in a shared trust that our choices can transcend inherited limitations. It is within this ongoing process of intentional creation that we find the true capacity for resilience, renewal, and transformation. Reflecting on this journey so far, the overarching implication emerges, one rooted in the profound recognition that human bonds are fundamentally flexible and rooted in the acts of connection we choose to make. These ideas scaffold the understanding that meaning is never fixed, but continually forged anew through conscious effort and moral resolve. They underscore the importance of viewing our interactions as opportunities for active participation in a collective enterprise, rather than as passive recipients of predetermined roles or identities. This perspective elevates the simple act of giving, of creating a family, into a powerful act of agency, an affirmation that our capacity to shape and influence the fabric of community is both limitless and vital. It prepares us to face the final notion, which promises to deepen this understanding and to open new vistas of possibility for a human existence rooted in shared purpose and unshakable resilience.